Okay, guys, so I am trying this out. Not sure if it's going to work or not, but we're going to see. So I am going to try to record this and present to you circulatory system anatomy. So let's see how this works, all you cool cats and kittens. All right, so circulatory system anatomy. All right, so that's what we are looking at right now. This lesson is going to cover information from the written lesson, and it's going to have a little bit extra. Okay, so this is definitely something you should be taking notes on or adding to the notes that you already have from the written lesson. Additionally, this is for clarification purposes to hopefully make sure you are understanding what the heck is going on with this whole circulatory system. Okay, so hopefully this works out well. If not, we'll figure it out. Okay, so circulatory system anatomy. Of course, our anatomy is always going to be the parts, right? So these are the parts of our system, and the parts of the circulatory system are pretty few, right? There's not a lot. Now, obviously, we can get more complicated and break down each of these, but we are going to keep it simple here. Okay, so the circulatory system is made up of the heart. It has arteries, veins, and capillaries. And remember, we call these three things blood vessels. And then, of course, the circulatory system has blood pumping through it. Okay, so those are the most important aspects of the circulatory system, and these are our anatomical pieces. Okay, now other organs are definitely going to aid or use the circulatory system to do the things that they need to do, and we've learned about some of them, and we're going to learn about some others. Okay, so first of all, the lungs, you should know by now, if you've completed the written lesson, you totally know this, that the lungs are a huge factor in the circulatory system. The lungs are going to aid the circulatory system in its job to bring oxygen and nutrients and take out waste. And then the intestines are going to be that nutrients piece, right? So they're going to be aiding the circulatory system as well. And then the endocrine system, or the endocrine organs, are going to use the circulatory system as a way to move their stuff around. So those endocrine organs need the circulatory system to do their job, which is to move hormones and use those as chemical messengers. Okay, so those are the parts. So let's break it down a little bit further. Not going to get too in depth again, but we are going to cover what you should have covered in the written lesson and a little bit extra, just a little bit. Okay. So the main organ of the system is your heart, and no, it's not like a Valentine's Day heart where we draw our little sides and complete it with our little hands, right? The heart doesn't have anything to do with love, actually. It's just a symbol. Okay, so the heart is the main organ of the system, of the circulatory system. It works as a pump, so it is extremely muscular, right? And we talked about this a little bit with the muscular system, where cardiac muscle can only be found in the heart, and that is what that is. Your heart has 4 chambers, and its other main job is going to be maintaining pressure. And this is going to come into play when we talk about gas exchange a little bit later in this presentation. So, keep that in mind. All right, so the heart is a pump, okay? The heart is made up of 4 chambers. There are 2 upper, that is the left and the right atria, and then 2 lower, the left and right ventricles. So not really crazy names, but something you can totally learn. The heart also has these valves that keep blood flowing in one direction. And this is going to be extremely, extremely important when the heart is pumping, which is always, right? And so these valves, these 4 valves, are going to make sure that blood is not flowing backwards, and it's called backflow. And so to prevent that, these valves have to close shut really hard to make sure that blood is going only in one direction. And this is also going to aid in that pressure that I talked about on the last slide. Okay, the 4 valves are going to be the tricuspid, which is between the right atrium and right ventricle, the pulmonary, which is in between the right ventricle and pulmonary artery, the mitral valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle, and the aortic valve, which is between the left ventricle and the aorta, which I will show you this in greater detail a little bit further when I talk about the blood flow through the heart. Okay, so I'll show you this in just a second, so hang tight there. But you do need to know these are the parts which we will need to know for actually understanding the heart. All right, some other things that aid in the circulatory system function are arteries, right? And these are the biggest blood vessels, so they're the large blood vessels. The arteries are thick and they are elastic, right? They have to be able to pump this blood and move it around the body. So they're thick and elastic. They are going to expand and contract to pump the blood. So the heart is the beginner pump. The arteries are keeping it going, right? And so these arteries are going to act as superhighways to carry oxygenated blood away from the heart. Okay, this is always going to be the case. If we're talking about an artery, we're talking about blood moving away from the heart. Now, there is one exception. Now, the blood is still moving away from the heart in this exception, but it is not oxygenated blood, right? So a pulmonary artery is connected to the heart, but it is taking deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Okay, so this deoxygenated blood is going to move from the heart to the lungs through the pulmonary artery, but it is still taking blood away from the heart. Okay, so that's why it's an artery. And then finally, just wanted you guys to remember the aorta is the largest artery. So it would be this guy coming off the top of the heart, and it is the largest because it takes all that freshly oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. Okay, next we have veins. Veins are going to be thinner than arteries, so they're not as thick as your arterial walls, but they're a little bit thinner. And these are not pumping blood, okay? Instead, they are totally dependent on skeletal muscles to move the blood within them. Okay, so these skeletal muscles are pumping the blood as opposed to the vein itself pumping the blood. So it relies on skeletal muscles and then these fancy valves, which we use in our heart, right? To make sure the blood isn't flowing backwards and pooling at the bottom or in our like feet, right? So these veins are really important to bring blood back to the heart. So they are going to be carrying deoxygenated blood back to the heart. And again, we have an exception, that is the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins are carrying blood to the heart, but it is oxygenated blood to the heart from the lungs, okay? But because they're moving from the lungs to the heart, they are known as veins. And just a little exception there in that they're carrying oxygenated blood, not deoxygenated blood. And then finally, our last blood vessel is capillaries. Capillaries are the tiniest blood vessels, so they're real small. They are one single cell layer thick, and this is where gas exchange is going to occur. And gas exchange is one of the main things that the circulatory system is responsible for. So these capillaries are extremely necessary for the movement of oxygen, carbon dioxide, these different wastes and products that your body has, right? So these little capillaries are where gas is moving in and moving out. Okay, so like here in this little picture, we have this red part is signifying oxygenated blood. And as it moves through the capillary system, you'll see the oxygen is moving out, which is signified by this purplish color. And then finally we get down here and we have a bluish color, and that is meaning that there is no more oxygen because all of the oxygen moves out here in the capillaries in this example. Okay, now in the lungs, it would be different, right? It would be in the reverse direction where the oxygen is moving in. So the blood would come to the lungs and it would be this, not technically blue, but in this picture, it would be blue. And then it would get oxygenated in the capillaries and then it would move out back to the heart to be pumped to the rest of the body and be oxygenated. Okay, so those are the capillaries. So those are our three blood vessels. Right, so the pathways of the circulatory system are made up of our three blood vessels here. We have arteries, like we talked about. We have veins, and then we have capillaries. And you can see how the big arteries are much different than the smaller veins. And then finally, the capillaries are the smallest. Okay, so the circulatory system is made up of two loops. There's a pulmonary loop and then there's a systemic loop. The pulmonary loop delivers deoxygenated blood from the body to the lungs. So it takes in, which I'll talk about the blood flow through the heart in just a second in the next slide. But this pulmonary loop, I want you to relate this word pulmonary with the lungs, right? So the deoxygenated blood is coming back from the body. It's been depleted of its oxygen. It's done all the delivering it could. And now it comes back to the heart, and it now needs to move to the lungs to get reoxygenated. So that pulmonary loop is going to be there. And then we have a systemic loop, and that systemic loop is delivering oxygenated blood to the different parts of the body. And okay, so the systemic loop, I want you to think a whole system. In this case, our whole body, right? So that systemic loop is a whole system. It's delivering oxygenated blood to the different parts of the whole body, right? And so let me talk about how this is moving and how blood is moving through the system, okay? So blood is going to enter the right atrium of the heart through the superior and inferior vena cava, and I'll pull up a picture of this in just a second, so don't fret. So this is deoxygenated blood coming back from the body. This means this blood has been circulated through the body, and it now needs to be reoxygenated. So it's coming into the right atrium. And then it's going to move through the tricuspid valve. And so remember that valve is going to prevent any backflow. So any blood that's made it from the right atrium to the right ventricle is going to stay in the right ventricle simply because this tricuspid valve is going to snap shut aggressively, and it's going to make sure that blood doesn't move backwards. Okay, and so this is still deoxygenated. So on the right side of your heart, you're going to have deoxygenated blood. All right, so then this blood is going to move through the pulmonary valve and into the pulmonary artery. Remember, that's our exception there. And it's going to go to the lungs. So our pulmonary artery is taking blood away from the heart, but it is deoxygenated in this case. And that's our only exception of an artery carrying deoxygenated blood. At the lungs, gas exchange is occurring. So gas exchange is happening where blood is going to drop off carbon dioxide, which is our waste product from all of the energy that's being created in our body. And then we're going to pick up oxygen, which is the energy source that we need to do all the things that we do, right? So we need that oxygen to our cells. And so our lungs are going to bring that in, and then gas exchange is going to occur in the capillaries of our lungs. Oxygenated blood is then going to come back from the lungs through the pulmonary veins. Remember, that's our other exception. That's why we have these in bold here. The veins are bringing the blood back to the heart. That's why they're called veins, but they are oxygenated. And this is going to be the only case in which we have oxygenated blood in veins. Okay, it's going to enter the left atria, and then blood is going to travel through that mitral valve. The mitral valve is in between, remember, the left atria and the left ventricle. So it's traveling through that valve. When that valve snaps shut, blood cannot move backwards. Okay, we do not want oxygenated and deoxygenated blood mixing. So that's extremely important. And then finally, the blood is going to leave the heart through the aortic valve and the aorta to travel to the rest of the body. And so we see this happening in this case here. Okay, so the blood again is coming in through the superior and inferior vena cava. And superior just means it's coming from the head, and inferior just means it's coming from anywhere from the chest down, it's traveling upwards, coming into our right atria, through our tricuspid valve, into our right ventricle, through our pulmonary valve, out through our pulmonary artery. We're going to go over here to the lungs, and then it's going to come back in through the pulmonary veins, and then into the left atrium, and now it's oxygenated, so you can see that in the red. And then we're going to go through the mitral valve, and then we have the left ventricle, and then we have the aortic valve, and you'll go under here, which you can't really see, but you'll imagine. And then you come out of the aorta, and the aorta then is taking all that blood. It has lots and lots of branches, and it's going to take it to the rest of the body. Okay, so I hope that makes a little bit more sense, or if it didn't make sense before, I hope it does now. All right, so gas exchange. What the heck is going on with gas exchange? And so this is kind of the last part that I wanted to talk about before I let you get off here for anatomy, because I know I mentioned it in the written lesson, so I don't want to go unobserved here. And really, I just copy and pasted the really good, to the point information from the stuff that I gave you before. Okay, so in gas exchange, oxygen-rich blood in this case, now this is just an example. It can be deoxygenated blood too, so don't like fret, everything's fine. I will talk about the latter in a second. Okay, so for example, in this example, we have oxygen-rich blood traveling through a capillary. And so you can see that in this picture up here, right? So we have oxygenated, that is signified by the red. It is traveling through this capillary, and the capillary is under a slightly greater pressure, okay? Pressure gradients are a huge deal in the circulatory system, which I'll talk a little bit more about in physiology. But this pressure gradient then is going to push, because all of our gases, liquid, really anything in science is always moving from a higher gradient to a lower gradient, okay? So the higher pressure is going to be pushing this oxygen out, okay? And so again, the oxygen-rich blood is traveling through the capillaries under a slightly greater pressure than the cells adjacent. So it wants to move out of these capillaries into the cells nearby. So it's moving from from these arteries through these capillaries out into the cells, and it's reached a lower pressure. And so it really likes that. And so that's what kind of keeps equilibrium and keeps your body happy. Okay, now let's say we're going backwards. Let's say we're coming back, right? This is where we're in our veins, and how do the veins carry the waste products, right? Because remember, in the lungs, we are exhaling carbon dioxide. And so we're doing that by the same way, right? We're doing this gas exchange, but it's doing it, quote unquote, automatically, but it's automatic because of this pressure, okay? So this pressure is really important. And so again, in the veins, the pressure is dropping. And so inside of the vein at that point, the pressure is lower than the pressure in the adjacent cells. And so the gases want to move out of the cells and into the bloodstream, because things are always, always, always going to move from higher pressure to lower pressure. Okay, so that's kind of what makes our bodies happy, moving from higher pressure to lower pressure to kind of equalize everything. So that is how gas exchange occurs, not only in our lungs, but also in the areas in which blood is coming back from the body after it's been used and deoxygenated. Okay, so I hope that makes a little bit more sense. And if not, hang tight, because I'm going to talk a little bit more about pressure gradients and gas exchange in the physiology PowerPoint. So keep a lookout for that. I hope this makes sense, guys. If not, please email me.